Hello, my name is Sarah and I am your chakra coach. On this podcast, we'll be exploring how the chakra system can help guide you to grow your emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual wellness, leading you closer to your highest self. Hello, welcome. Welcome back. Welcome for the first time. Everyone is welcome here. I want to take a minute before today's episode to acknowledge and respond to some messages I got in response to the past 4 weeks series on the 4 A's of healing: authenticity in the root chakra, agency in the solar plexus chakra, anger in the sacral chakra, and acceptance in the heart chakra. Several of you experienced some really raw feelings during this work, listening to the episodes and digging deep into your healing journey. And that's really normal, I think, but it's so very uncomfortable and even miserable at times. Healing like this asks us to go back and look at some potentially really painful things in our past in order to understand our present. It's a reminder that some of those wounds live much closer to the surface than we'd like to admit. And even the ones that don't can come right on up when we're working on ourselves, be it the emotional, mental, or spiritual path. And it can leave us feeling really open and vulnerable, and not always in the way that opens us to connection. Sometimes just in the way that leaves us feeling unsafe. If you feel this starting to happen, I cannot stress enough that it is okay to stop if you want to. There are many healing methods, and some are going to be safer emotionally than others for some of us. You don't have to use one that doesn't feel right. There aren't any points awarded for how unhappy we can be while healing. I mean, yes, it can be uncomfortable. A certain amount of that is inevitable, but if you feel yourself drifting into a shame spiral or anxiety or depression, remember that those things are not necessarily helpful for healing, right? It's absolutely no problem to pull back, especially if you currently exist in a circumstance that can trigger you anyway. Pay attention to your body and let it guide you. If you can safely process the sensations these wounds bring up, then go ahead. But if you find yourself on the edge of a panic attack, there's no sense in moving forward in that moment. And whatever you feel, be sure that you have some good self-care practices in place, the kind that we talked about in episode 131. These are going to be key in your healing journey. They'll act as an anchor to ground you in yourself and your self-safety. Now, as the universe would have it, this week I have an interview for you with Amanda Kate, who practices a healing modality called Energetic Kinesiology, which, I'll be honest, I really had no idea what it was until Amanda and I met. And to be fair, she had no idea what it was until she stumbled into it during a really dark point in her life. But it turned out to be just the tool she needed to make a complete 180. Her story is so relatable for so many of us, and I really wanted her to be able to share this tool, this energetic kinesiology with us, which maybe you haven't heard of either. It helps change subconscious patterning, which is exactly what we've been talking about for the past few weeks. I'm going to let her tell you her story rather than me trying to do it, but I do want you to know that we briefly talk about domestic violence. As usual, there's nothing graphic, but your safety is everything. Overall, her story is one of healing and recovery and thriving. Okay, here's my amazing conversation with Amanda Kate.
Good morning, Amanda. How are you?
I'm really well. I'm so excited for today's chat.
I am too. And thanks for getting up early. Y'all, I don't know if you know this, but there's like a bazillion hour time difference between Amanda and me. So we're so we're recording this on literally 2 different days. I'm on Tuesday and
Yeah,
you're on Wednesday, which I
that's right.
I just I love because that's so like trippy. But anyway,
It
how's
always
tomorrow?
blows my mind.
Right? So,
Yeah.
Amanda has a lot of really, really good stuff for us today, y'all, and I'll be learning right along with you. So I'm so excited because I feel like I'm about to like get my own mind blown by everything that we're about to talk about today. um, and so, that's always fun. So, I guess before we get too deep into that, would you mind telling us just kind of your story? Um, kind of the how'd you get here from there, if you
Yeah,
wouldn't mind.
absolutely. I think, and the bit that so many people really resonate with was I was a chronic people pleaser. It was my way of being accepted in the world. I know I can tell by your look there that,
Never heard of
you
it.
don't resonate with that at
Mm-mm. No, I
all.
don't know anything about that. Go on. Tell us
Go
more.
on. I shall teach you. Um, I put everybody else ahead of me. I put all of their needs ahead of mine. I wanted to make sure that everybody else was happy because I used to get really, really terrified when people would scream and shout and get angry. And so I saw it as part of my job to make sure that nobody had any reason to explode at me in that kind of way. It was, and I know that's not my job as a child, but that was what I thought my job was. It was the peacemaker, the people pleaser, and it was about trying to keep the environment as peaceful as possible.
And when you say that,
And
you're talking
then,
about literally your home environment as a child growing up. We haven't
oh,
even got to adult Amanda yet. We're still
no,
at baby Amanda. Oh, good.
yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah.
Fantastic. Go on.
So, well, my sister I was always told she was born to be an only child. So I thought if I'm inconveniencing her by being alive, and not in terms of that, that I shouldn't have been born, but in terms of the fact that if you look at only child behavior, that was what my sister expressed. It was that it's all about me, and I want to be the star of the show. And I was quite happy playing the supporting actress role, but as a result, there was this little bit of me, and I didn't recognize it until later. I was doing my trauma work, that I started going, oh, that makes a lot of sense. It was me trying to find this place that I fit into the world.
Right, but
And I
without taking
always
up
felt,
too much space.
oh, yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
last thing I wanted to do was take up space.
Interesting.
And, and my mum had similar issues to me with struggling with menstrual cycle as well. So I was also really wary. It was always marked on the calendar when it was coming, and I was always really wary of the, mercurial moods. And that's okay too. We can't control what we don't know and what we don't understand. And she really, really suffered, as did I later on. And it wasn't until I was exploding at my children over stupid things that I'm like, I see this pattern. And
Yeah.
God, I hope my daughter doesn't go down the same route as me and my mother, because those genetics really sucked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but with that explosiveness, which, like I say, was not my mum's fault, but that put me on edge. So I would be in this hyper vigilant state of, don't piss off mum, don't piss off mum.
Right.
It was like a
Absolutely.
real, um, and now that I understand trauma, I completely understand all of that. And also, as I said to you, I love and adore my mother, and she, it was, it felt out of her control at that time with the knowledge that we had and with the medical system that we had, and the fact that we didn't look at natural therapies really,
And I
through
think,
my
there's
family.
a certain amount of uh, some topics were taboo. You just didn't
Oh,
talk about them. You just silently
exactly.
suffered. And there are
Yeah.
topics like that now as well,
Yeah.
right? And just the topics
Oh,
just change generation to
yeah.
generation. So she was doing the best she
Absolutely.
could with the tools she had at the time, right? Just like
Yeah.
99.9% of the world.
I think 100% of us are doing the best we can with the tools we
Yeah,
had. It's
got
just
to be,
a lot
right?
of us have very unresourceful tools. And
Well,
that's,
don't worry,
like I
we're going to
say,
get to one.
we are.
All right,
And
so you're a
so
child people
that
pleaser.
childhood was, for me, just making sure that everything was okay. And I just carried that through, even at school with my friendship groups. And it kind of made me a bit of a runner. So if there were problems in a friendship group, I'd sort of change friendship groups. And so I would, through high school, be on the outskirts of all the group. And I still notice it with friendships now. I am really good at getting a group together or introducing people who are going to get along, but then I find myself on the outer and being squidged out a little bit further. I'm great with one on one relationships, but I still have that innate almost fear of being
Mm,
part of a group because of the
interesting.
tumultuousness that high school was. And it's only really something that, I mean, I knew I was doing it in high school, but as I've gotten older and I've seen it happen in other groups, I'm like, oh, there's still that going on. But, I stuck by the line, and this is part of the reason I got some of the feedback I got in high school of being a goody goody and all the rest of it, because I was so scared of
Mm,
going outside that good girl behavior and disappointing people.
mm.
Um, so I stayed on that little straight and narrow and got good grades, went to university, got good grades, went and worked for my dad for a bit, and then my sister wanted me to go traveling with her. And so that sort of really started the adventure for me. And went to the UK, did my working holiday visa, met a man, got married, two children, beautiful home, 11 years in the UK from my expected original 2 years.
And you
And
lived
then,
happily ever after, and the podcast is over. Is that right?
absolutely,
Okay, you thought
absolutely.
that was where we were headed. Okay, so for real though.
And then we emigrated back to Australia, and things had not been great for, well, I saw red flags at the very beginning of the relationship, if I'm honest, and ignored them because I didn't trust my intuition. And I certainly did not have the courage to act on it, because if I acted on my intuition, I would certainly not be people pleasing. And so we emigrated back here in 2011. And when I say I went back home, my home was in Adelaide. We moved to Melbourne, which is a good 10-hour drive away, because I was told if I can't be close to my family, we certainly aren't going to be close to yours. And again, you can sort of
Huh.
start seeing a bit of a picture coming up here. It was always about what was going on for him. He used to say, there is nothing wrong with me, so it's your fault. If it was sorry, it would be, I'm sorry you're upset about that, but that's really something you need to think about. And so it was always, everything was always pushed back onto me. And the goalposts of that expected behavior for me changed literally daily, if not more often. So I'd get the idea of what game we were playing, and all of a sudden the rules would change and we'd be in a completely different game. And I'd be like, what's going on?
Mm,
And so, again, that hypervigilance from childhood came back in a vengeance, and I was constantly, getting more and more stressed. And the less I felt in control, the more I was trying to micromanage everything, because I felt out of control in the big stuff. And all of that was just like me being wound in this tight little ball. And by 2013, I ended up with chronic fatigue, but we didn't know that's what it was at the time. I was having 3-hour naps in the afternoon, couldn't get through the day, taking ages to recover from exercise. Started seeing a naturopath, and I'd sort of started dipping my toe in the water of some spiritual development, personal development stuff. And I started saying to him, you realize you speak to me like you've stepped in dog poo and I'm stuck to the bottom of your shoe. I said, if you speak to people at work like that, you're not going to have your job for long. So I hope it is just me that you're speaking to in that way. Um, and I remember saying that kind of thing to him. And that's when everything started getting really toxic, because I was actually pointing out that this
hmm
is not okay behavior. And it just festered from there. And so at the beginning of 2015, I had a massive breakdown, because I was the recipient of 4 hours of chronic feedback on everything that I did wrong, everything that I was doing wrong, how I was ruining our lives, how I was ruining our children's lives, all the rest of it.
Oh my gosh.
And I went to my doctor to get a mental health care plan, because I was the one who was broken and needed to
That's
be
right.
fixed.
That's right.
Yeah. And I rang to book in with a psychologist who did mindfulness stuff, because I'm going, if I'm going to do this, I want to be able to bring some of the stuff that I've been learning into my healing, because it feels right for me. And it was really the first time I started acting on and trusting my intuition. So I rang this receptionist, and she said, look, it's 4 weeks before we can get you in with this psychologist. It's 6 weeks till we can get you into the mindfulness course. You sound stressed. And I gave her the really broad brushstrokes. We've just emigrated from the UK. My, husband's struggling to, to be away from his family. He's struggling with a job he doesn't really like. My son struggled settling in with school. He was physically harmed 13 times in 26 weeks at his first school. I then had to change his schools. He went from this bright, bubbly, beautiful young boy to stomach aches and anxiety and all the things. And my daughter had always been an externalizer of what was going on inside. And because, of course, I was miserable, she's picking up on all of that stuff and externalizing. And she would have 4-hour tantrums because I'd put her hair in pigtails instead of a ponytail, or she didn't have butterflies on her shoes or something.
Mm-hmm.
And some days she wouldn't actually stop coming at me until I was in the fetal position on the floor crying. And I said this bit to the psychologist receptionist, and she said, "And who's got your back?"
I was
And
just
I
thinking
just
that.
burst into tears. And I said to her, "I'm holding up this house of cards, and nobody has my back."
Yeah.
Because I'd already recognized that. I'd recognized it years ago. I said, even in the UK, I'd say to my friends, "I'm a single mum. It's just that my husband's bringing in a paycheck, but I'm a single mum. I did everything." And so the fact that the receptionist asked me that question still blows my mind to this day. But she said, "Have you tried kinesiology?" And I'm like, "What?" I said, "Look, I'm desperate, willing to try anything. I haven't heard about it. Don't know what it is. Book me in."
Mm-hmm.
And because I could get in with that within a week, it was
Yeah.
actually probably a few days. Got my appointment, went in, just no clue. And that kinesiologist, it just, that first session blew my mind. The stuff that they were picking up in my energy field. And I could feel the energy moving because I'm very sensitive in that way. I've always been empathic, hence the people pleasing. I've always understood human behavior, hence the tying myself in knots to try and keep everything together so that we don't get the explosions. And I, they said to me, "You have no idea how emotionally abused you are, do you?" My first line when I sat down, and we still laughed about it years later because I saw them as my main kinesiologist for, probably the first 5 years of my healing. And then they were also a teacher of mine through my diploma and through my advanced diploma. And so I got to know them really well. And well, more so they got to know me
Right.
really well.
Sure.
And we still laughed about the fact that when I first walked into their clinic, I said, "I am so broken that I have to fix myself to save my marriage." And that was how I started my healing journey, was because I felt like I was such a waste of, human flesh, because I'd been ground down so
Yeah.
badly. I was always questioning myself. I hated myself. I would see a mirror and I would want to smash it because I hated myself that much. I'm like, how can somebody, and then when he was away from me for, his work trips and things, I'd go, "I'm not actually that bad a person." Like, and things would start to sort of, I'd be going, "I'm not that bad a person. I'm a good mum. I'm good to my friends." And yet there was still this bit that would not leave me, like a cancer growing, of just going, "What are you even doing here if you're ruining his life so much?" And so that made a lot of sense to me, but I didn't see it in my marriage, funnily enough, the emotional abuse, for another 4 months after they'd said that to me. And then it took me another 4 months to get out of the marriage, but 6 months to the day from me starting my kinesiology sessions, I was sitting in the classroom learning how to do it because I was so determined to be able to help other people the way it had helped me
Yeah.
already. And I hadn't even gotten
Mm-hmm.
out of my marriage at that point, but I was starting to find why I was in those behaviors, what was attracting those behavior patterns to me. I was starting to understand what was going on under the surface that was creating some of this physical disease and lack of wellness that wasn't caused by physical stuff at all. It
Right.
was all the mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual pain was manifesting in physical ailments. And
I
so,
want
although,
to, oh, I'm sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
Yeah,
I
go.
have to say, I just want to ask a kind of a follow-up question to something that you said a little while
Mm,
ago before we get too far down this road.
yeah,
You said at a certain point, it was the first time you'd started to trust your instinct. And I know so
mhm,
many of us have trouble with that because we're told never to trust ourselves. If you trust
yeah,
yourself, then you're not trusting the people who have power over you. And if
yeah,
you trust yourself, then people don't have power over you. And that's the worst thing that some people can imagine, is not having
yes.
power over others. So, was there a moment? Was it simply a culmination? You said you'd started to look into some spiritual modalities and things like
Mhm.
that. How did that first initial little spark of being able to trust your intuition even show up?
Do you know the very first, I had always had really spot on intuition. And in hindsight, I would always go, God, I knew that was going to happen.
Ah,
So I'd seen I knew it was going to happen, and I'd see the way it was playing out, and I had a really good overview of all that stuff. I could see these events coming and happening, but I never trusted myself to take some of the other intuitive nudges I was getting and actually act on them. I knew realistically when my son was 10 days old that I would end up having to leave my marriage because my ex-husband was never going to be the person he'd promised he was going to be, and I could see the toxicity building even then. But at that point, my mind was, can I get through long enough to get my kids through high school and at least give them a stable home through that? Now, I see the kind of screwed up idea on that. But my grandparents were married for, for their whole lives. They made over 60 years married. My parents have made over 50 years married.
hmm,
Divorce was not something we did.
yeah,
It just wasn't. It wasn't in the DNA. It wasn't in what our family relationships looked like. And so for me, that was going to be the ultimate failure. And the
right.
worst thing we could do in this world was fail by anyone's standard. And so I would double down on papering over the cracks in our facade so that nobody else could see what was going on behind closed doors. Because even when I was in it, I knew it was really screwed up,
And isn't
really
it
messed up.
fascinating that we think, oh gosh, we'll stay to provide a stable environment, and that's literally the opposite of
Yeah.
what you, I mean,
Yeah.
in your particular case, it sounds like that's the opposite of what was happening. There
Oh,
was not
yeah.
actually any
No,
stability because stability would
there was
not be playing a new game every day.
no.
Stability is playing the same game with the same rules and
Yeah.
then exploring. And
Yeah.
that's not an option. So it is interesting how
Mm.
we sort of trick ourselves into these things. But again, you
But it's
don't
the narrative.
oh,
That's the
100%.
narrative. Is that it's broken families? Well, no, actually, my family was broken. We were toxic. There was nothing stable and safe at all in that environment. And I was constantly standing in front of my children, taking the bullets for them
Yes.
so that they wouldn't suffer. And that was one of the biggest fears for me of leaving was if I go, I know who's the next person to take all these bullets. And I don't want them to have to do that.
Yeah, it feels like
And
a
when I
no-win.
left, that was the case. It
Yeah.
was the case. And so that was a real challenge. But again, and I think this is one of the best and worst things is that as women so often, and I can only speak from, a woman's point of view because that's what I am and that's predominantly what I work with.
Mhm.
As women, we often need an excuse to do the work for ourselves. So mine was, I need to teach my children a better form of love because I don't want my children loving anybody else the way my ex-husband or I love each other. And I don't want anyone being loved in the way that we're being loved because we're not being loved and we're not being loving at all. It's
Right. So,
all smoke and mirrors and showing and,
yeah,
a big
it's a bad
stage.
example, and you can't the thought
Yeah.
of them existing in a relationship like that one is
Oh,
unbearable.
it
So it
broke
sounds
my
like you
it
had
broke
a
my heart.
really yeah, yeah, oh, yeah. It sounds
Mm,
like so when you were able to sort of put together a pattern of solid intuition, you were able to
yeah,
tap back into
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And
And
I
the
think everybody
first,
has that, right? If you look back, a lot of people are like, "Oh, actually, I
yeah,
do have pretty decent intuition." It's been sort of like shoved down or pushed out or however you wanna
yeah,
envision that. But so all of us
mm,
essentially can tap back into that
yeah,
intuition
yeah.
if we've lost it, I think is what I hear you saying.
And I don't think we ever lose it. What we do is we suppress it and we
That's a better
shout
term. That's a
over
better
it.
word. Yeah.
So what we do is it, because it is the first voice. It is the first inkling or feeling or however you receive your intuition, because some do it through feeling, some just know, some will see signs, some will hear things, some will get a whiff of a smell or taste something. It comes in through one of our senses, and we all have one predominant sense that we read the world through, and then we often have other senses that we use as well. For me, I have the knowing, the sight, the hearing, and the feeling, and the smell and taste are ones that come and go that I'm developing. And what I found was I would receive these senses, and most people do, but then because we are taught that thinking is king,
Yeah.
we overthink it. We pull it into our head from our body, and we start to think through all of the things, and we try and make a spreadsheet, and life isn't a balance sheet. It's not a spreadsheet. It doesn't, the columns never add up. And so we need to, that intuition is giving us the soul guidance that we need to live our own life of passion and purpose, our way forward.
Hmm.
And what we often do is we hold that intuitive nudge up to everything that we know, everything that we're seeing, everything that we've been programmed and conditioned with. And we go, oh, no, I can't do that because of this. I can't do this because of that. Now, for me to be thinking about leaving my marriage when I was surrounded by people who were all, and I use the term very loosely, happily married, that was like me stepping so far out of the norm. And I lost most of the people around me during this. And because people did not believe what I said was going on behind closed doors, even those people who had seen it in action still ended up turning around. And I had people beforehand going, if my husband treated me like that, I'd be out the door, blah, blah, blah. When I left the door, they all went and hung around him because he had the
Yeah.
money, he had the influence. He told everybody that I was mentally disturbed. And
Yeah.
that's still the story. I even when I see people now who I used to know from that past life, I kind of go, I know you think I have mental disorders. And that's okay. That's where we're at. That's fine. And technically I did. I ended up in PTSD.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I was like, well, who doesn't really have some sort of mental
Mm,
disorder, if you want to even call it
yeah.
that? But yeah, I mean, people do, they made their choices. You
Yeah.
making a choice for you disrupted their narrative
Yeah.
because,
Absolutely.
especially any of your women friends who were also not feeling they could make the choice for
Mm,
themselves like you were doing. It's a threat to see
yeah.
somebody doing that, and it's hard, and so it is easier to be like, well, you're broken,
Hmm.
you've done something wrong,
Yeah.
than it is to say, oh my gosh, Amanda's made a strong choice to take care of herself and her
Yeah.
children, and I don't feel that I can. And so instead of
Mm,
that, it's,
yeah.
oh,
And the
look what a
other,
crazy person she is, right? Which,
yeah. And the other part is I thrived. I remember running into the school mum and she said, oh my God, hun, every time I see you, you are looking younger, you are looking healthier. She said, what did you do? And I made a bit of a joke. I said, I lost 90 kilos. Um, and she took a little moment and then she was like, oh, okay. But it was interesting because I was thriving. All
mhm,
of a sudden, I was out from under this external influence that was feeding those hateful voices in my head
right.
and encouraging them and fertilizing them. And I was starting to really delve into the spiritual work, really delve into the personal development work, really working on myself and healing all of these things that I then realized were traumas, because I thought traumas were big things like accidents and being in a war and being shot at. And I didn't realize that I was going through trauma every single day
Yes.
through that peppering, because trauma is anything that is less than nourishing and nurturing to our soul, and it's what we store as less than nourishing and nurturing. So what's traumatic to me may not be traumatic to you and vice versa, but that constant criticism, that constant ripping apart of everything that I loved about myself was that abuse that hit literally bone deep. And as I moved out of it, people also started getting a bit funny with, once a woman is single for long enough, and I was single for 2 years before I started dating. I really, really honed in on working on myself, throwing myself into study, setting up my business, looking after the kids, doing all of those sorts of things. And I didn't even start dating until I'd gotten past that 2 year anniversary. And especially once you start dating, people start getting very nervy if they invite you to a gathering where it's all married couples and you're single and loving life and happy, and they know you're on the prowl for a new part.
Totally on the
And so all
prowl.
of a sudden, you start not being invited,
Yeah.
even for those people who stuck by you through the crappy years. And so you just start to notice things like that. And I got to a point very, very early on, like within a month of separation, I was like, if you are going to support him, then to my mind, you are supporting domestic violence and I will not be your friend. And I had a
Yeah, I
very clear
cannot have
boundary on
space,
that.
cannot have space in my life for that, right?
No.
And that is a boundary that probably contributed to your healing, quite honestly,
Mm,
because anytime if you keep even a little of that in your life, it
yeah.
can bleed right over into your
Yeah.
psyche. Oh, that was really, really smart, but I imagine it was
Yeah.
very difficult.
It was, especially because I had family members who were still supportive of him. So I effectively, I haven't spoken to my sister for 2 years. And that's in the last 2 years. And, even I have kept the relationship going with my parents, but there was no support for the first 8 months. I was literally on my own. And, that was really, really hard. And also, it's given me the best learnings and the best healing possible because I can now be around them and love them for doing what they're doing and for who they are. Because what they were thinking of primarily was their grandchildren. And if something happened to me, they wanted to know they'd still have access to their grandchildren, which makes sense from their point of view. I
Yeah.
really do understand it. And also having their world view on things, it was really challenging
Yeah.
seeing me leave a marriage and thrive
Right. That is also a
because
threat to the narrative.
it's a threat to the patriarchy,
That
really.
really, really is. Oh boy.
And so there was a lot of this stuff playing into it. But what it's really done for me is it has allowed me to open myself up to new ways of being. It's allowed me to really deeply heal all of that stuff, heal the family relationships that I've worked on. And even with my sister, the last time I saw her, even though we haven't spoken to each other for so long, the last time I saw her, I said to her, I love you and I miss you. And
Yeah.
both of those things are 100% true. I love her and I miss her deeply. What is also true is that I will not have her back in my life while she continues to disrespect my boundaries. And so I can do both. And that's the
Absolutely.
beauty of the work that I've done is I've delved into it. I've done the healing and I can hold those things together in that spiritual paradox without them fighting each other for attention, which means they sit comfortably within me.
I do want to get back into now like that healing,
Mm,
let's talk about the
yeah.
kinesiology. Let's talk about the process. Let's maybe
Mm.
start with what is that?
Yeah. So kinesiology in its very basic, and you have it in this way with physical therapists and occupational therapists in the US, is muscle movement. However, energetic kinesiology goes so much further. It's not just about how your muscles are moving, it is about the electrical signals that go through your muscles. So we use manual muscle testing. So if you think about the electrical signals that are going through your muscles, if something is not stressing them, that signal will hold strong. There will be a clear signal going through the muscle and the muscle will not move. But if your muscle has an incongruent electrical signal, or there's something stressing the signal, it stops working for a little bit, it stops conducting, then the muscle will not hold. And so we use that muscle tone and coherence to read what is going on in the subconscious mind. So we are asking questions and testing those muscles as we ask the questions to find out where the electrical signals, where the polarity, where those different vibrational frequencies in your body are not in harmony with your innate healing ability, which is what the body has. And so, what we do through that is we can work out by reading that muscle tone, and this is what we want to look for, is we want to know what seed was planted, when that seed was planted, and we want to go back to that to rip out the weed by the root so it doesn't grow again, changing that vibrational structure rather than deal with the symptoms that we're presenting with. And so if you think about a lot of the stresses that we store in our body, they're cumulative. And our brain is really lazy. I always think of, and this shows my age, Hong Kong Fooey had this receptionist. I know it was this really random cartoon, but she would just open a filing cabinet and shove a piece of paper in. There was no method. And I always think of our brain a little bit like that. It goes, oh, this kind of belongs with that. Yeah, that'll do. And shove it in that filing cabinet. And so often or I shouldn't say our brain, because people think our subconscious is between our ears, but our subconscious is in every cell of our body, every
right.
tiny bit of energy that makes up our energy field. It all holds our memory of everything that is, was, and ever will be. And so, but what happens is our body and brain make these connections and go, oh, they're kind of the same. Let's just chuck that in the same file. And these are kind of the same. So let's kind of chuck this in the same file. So often when we're trying to think our way through the problem, we're using our form of logic rather than the body's form of logic. And the body will put things that vibrationally match together. So if you're afraid because you're in a car, you about to hit the car in front of you, or, you've had a spider crawl up your arm, for example, it'll go, oh, they're both fear. Let's just chunk them together. Now, both very different types of fear, but your body can't distinguish that. The same way that when you have, say, a teacher shaming you about the work that you did, which happened often in the 80s and 90s at school, shame was a very useful training tool for us children. That shame will be the same as, your friends teasing you about something or your parent. And so all of this gets chunked together, even though it might be a completely different level of it. And so what we are doing is we're looking at the vibrational frequency of these events that often start in childhood through teenage years, even through adulthood. But we're looking at those first examples, that major event really that started to trigger these patterns where you were allowing more of that into your energy field because it was a vibrational match for what had already gone on.
Can you say that again?
So we're looking for that first major event, so that seed that was planted, that started to create that vibrational frequency that attracted more of that same vibrational frequency. So for me, my vibrational frequencies were a lot about shame, a lot about me not being good enough, me not being worthy, and me not being lovable. So I kept attracting all of these similar situations because, again, my brain, my reticular activating system, which is what in our brain looks at importance, everything that was proving to myself that I was not lovable, not worthy, I noticed all of those because that was highly important to me.
And then you
And what we've,
brought them closer to you.
yeah,
Okay, I said before I was
bringing them
going to
into
have
the
my mind
conscious
blown,
mind.
and I don't know if you can see my face, listeners. I know you can't see my face, but it's literally like, can you actually see my brain working right now?
And so a lot of what I was doing in bringing that subconscious patterning into my conscious brain, and this is what we do, we bring the subconscious into the conscious so you can start to see those patterns. And then when we have that conscious awareness of it, we can start to change those patterns.
Yes.
So now for me, I still love going to the beach every morning because in the last 2 years since I've had my puppy, every day I've gone to the beach and I walk him for about 7.5K. And that is the place where I notice all of the work that I've done Because even when it is driving rain and nobody else is on the beach because the weather is just so bad that anyone but the craziest person wouldn't be out there, um, I'm still going, "Oh, I wouldn't live anywhere else. This is amazing." Whereas 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 7 years ago, I would have gone, I'm not going out in that. That's just disgusting. That's crappy weather. I'm not going to leave my bed for that. And I wouldn't be able to see the magic and the beauty in it. I would be looking for all the rubbish in it. And so that's where I start to notice things, because I can see the magic and the beauty. And I look for, we have these little banjo sharks, which are a little bit like a cross between a shark and a stingray almost. And they come in quite close and they've got the most beautiful patterns on them. And so I look in the shallows for those, or for the little sand rays that are there. And, I look out for dolphins. They haven't been there since middle of October, and I saw some the other day. So I'm super excited because we had so much rain and they won't be around the dirtiness. So seeing them coming back is amazing. So I'm like, oh, the bay must be clearing. This is incredible. And go up to my cafe every morning and see all the regulars at the cafe and say hi to my little community and paddle the dogs. And I see all that beauty now because I'm training my brain to look for the beauty rather than to look for all of that other stuff that I was looking for. And when I fall back into the old habit of, feeling resentful or feeling unlovable or unworthy, I'm able to collect those. Okay, so what's been happening for me in the last week? What's led to that? I said to you this morning, I stayed in bed. I mean, our interview was at what, 6 a.m.
6
So I didn't
a.m.
stay in bed that, but I'm often up by 5, sometimes 4:30. And I stayed in bed extra this morning rather than getting up to do my yoga, because I just need a bit more of a rest. Again, listening to that body, because I know if I don't rest, then I will start to get into that resentful pattern. And we've got all the kids arriving this weekend. The last thing I want to do is have them arriving on the doorstep and, because I've worn myself out this week, be a resentful cow to them all.
No, that's not fun for anyone. No one's
Hell
having a good
no.
time with that.
Hell no. And so I can start to pick up those old behavior patterns much, much sooner, because I'm so aware of them through all of the healing work I've done, through that unpatterning and that deprogramming and the reprogramming of
So,
what do I want to look for.
energetic kinesiology, and forgive me
Mm.
if I'm simplifying this to
Mm.
an offensive degree,
Mm.
but it sounds like it's a mix of it's therapy. It's almost like talk therapy, but there's a physical muscular component, and
Mhm.
then there's energy. I mean, it just sounds like it's kind of taking a lot of these
Yeah.
different modalities that we've all, I shouldn't say
Yeah.
we've all, but a lot of us have been studying
Mm.
individually, and kind of
Yeah.
merges them into this
Yeah.
kinesiology
Mhm. Yeah. And it
technique.
is very much looking at the way the energy is moving through the body. And so yes, we do bring that thought through the conscious mind. The thing with talk therapy and the thing with a lot of medicine is it does tend to go around in circles. You talk around and around and around and around and around the problem. Now, really good psychologists and therapists do tend to move you out of those cyclic talking. But I have a lot of people coming to me going, oh my God, one session with you was like 3 sessions with my psych, because we're actually getting tools to deal with it.
Well, and your body won't lie, right?
No.
If I lose my muscle tone when you say resentment, well, there it is.
Mm.
Like, we
Yeah.
can't be like, maybe it's something else. We're like, nope,
Yeah.
it's resentment, right? Like,
Yeah.
so you get maybe to the root of it faster. You don't have to kind of wait around for the patient to give themselves
Yeah.
permission to have these hard conversations. The body is like,
Yeah.
there it is.
Yeah. And it's also, what does resentment mean for you? And how does your resentment now relate to that first bit of resentment that we've tested up? How do those two relate together? Because that's actually the important bit. Your body is remembering resentment now as this familiar electrical charge in your body, because everything in us is electrical.
That's right.
So, this electrical charge you are feeling now, how does it relate to that electrical charge now, then? And that's when you start to go, oh my God,
So
now
is
I see the pattern.
the point is the relationship. The point is to like go back and find that first moment,
Yeah.
and like you said, pull out
Yeah.
the weed to be like, this is kind of when I first remember that experience, and then do you
Mm.
plant well, we could take this analogy forever, but do we
Yeah.
plant something else in its place, or it is pulling out the weed and managing ourselves now? What is the process there?
I look at that part as we put in often some type of vibrational change. So whether that be using crystals, acupressure points, essential oils, something else with a different vibrational quality. Because what we don't want to do is leave you with these big energetic gaps in your body, because you're going to walk outside and something else energetic will
You
go,
just
oh,
slide right in there.
that's a
Yeah.
nice, that's a
Yep.
nice little home for me. So we want to make sure that your container is sealed, so to
Got it.
speak. And so we always want to infill something. And sometimes that might be an affirmation-y type thing, or it might be an exercise that you want to be doing at home. My idea with kinesiology is, so what we are effectively doing, if you want to break it down to its bare bones, is we are diffusing stress. So, and everything in the body is caused by physical, chemical, or emotional stress. That creates electrical stress, because then the messages are all getting a little bit, screwy and not quite transmitting properly. So if we take it down to that really bare bit, we're shifting that stress out of the body. We're allowing you to release that stress. I don't then want to send you home going, you've got to say this affirmation 5 times, 3 times a day, and then you have to drink, you have to do this and you have to do this. Because what I'm then doing is I'm taking the stress out of your body and I'm giving you a whole heap of expectation and stress back. So my idea is I try to get you to do things linked with another habit or behavior. So often I will suggest to people, when they have to stop at traffic lights, practice your deep breathing.
Oh, I see. Because you're going
Remind
to stop at a
yourself,
traffic light anyway.
you've got to
So,
stop there. You've got
yeah.
a minute or two, depending on where you are and what your traffic light sequence is. But you know what? Even in 30 seconds, you can get a really good couple of big, deep belly
Yeah.
breaths into you. And it's not impacting your day. It's, you've got this gap anyway. Or I tell people just to, when they've got their coffee or tea or whatever it is, to smell it and taste it and be really present with it. Some people have done that and gone, I actually didn't realize I didn't like coffee, but you've made me smell it and taste it now. And I'm like, but
Maybe
whatever.
switching up my morning routine. That is so interesting. But that's a very like a well-studied sort of psychological technique, right? Is habit stacking, is attaching a new habit to something that you're already doing. And what you're saying is, let's do this intentionally to
Mm,
address what we're working on in
yeah.
our kinesiology sessions. I think that's
Do you
such
know,
a so
for me,
valuable.
I didn't even originally know about habit stacking, but I knew that if I did all of my spiritual practices that I'd been taught throughout my day, I would, and I think I said this to you before, I wouldn't have time to sleep, eat, work. I would literally just be a monk on a mountaintop doing spiritual
Yeah.
practices. So I need to drop them in to my day where I can without adding the stress to my day. So on my morning walk, I will do my meditation then, because
Mhm.
I do, it's about 40 to 45 minutes up and 40 to 45 minutes back. So I've got a basically 2 hour round trip from my house, including the chai stop in the middle, to do my walk. Now, in that time, I will do my meditation. I will process what's going on for myself. I will do some of those spiritual practices. I would
Mhm.
consciously ground. I walk barefoot basically from October when I can through till about May.
That is
Sometimes,
opposite in Australia.
yes, it
That
is.
sounds miserable to me in the US, but it sounds amazing in the Southern Hemisphere.
So, and so I try to really consciously drop those bits in
Uh-huh.
so that I can do my spiritual practice throughout the day, rather than having to find half an hour to meditate, and rather than having to find this time to journal and this time to do this and this time to do that.
Because what's the point if your practices are the thing that's stressing you out? Like
Exactly.
you're losing your mind every day because you're like, I
Yeah.
didn't get to meditate and I'm supposed to. The supposed to
Yeah.
things, like those are the things that
Yeah.
get you, right? I'm
Yeah.
supposed to do this. I'm supposed to do this. I really should be doing this. And so
Yeah.
you are giving us a way to make them more seamlessly integrate into our
Mm.
day. That's
Yeah.
nice.
Because that's what I needed.
Yeah. Right. And so you sort of
I
developed
needed
this
less steps.
methodology around yeah,
Yeah.
right. I needed less things
Not more.
happening in my brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe this is a newbie question, but I'm a newbie, so it's okay. Is so kinesiology is a hands-on approach? So you
Do you know, until COVID hit, we were not allowed to call it kinesiology if we did it online. But because there is such an energetic component, it does translate to online beautifully.
does
And
it?
so
Okay.
since COVID, they've actually changed the rules through our associations that we can now do it online. But if you think about it, even having this conversation, we are connecting into each other's energetic radio station. So the way I
Yes.
look at it with what I'm doing when I work with people online, I'm connecting into their radio station, and I also throw my energetic blanket over them so that I can read what's going on in their field without me taking it on. So I
Okay.
have these two access points, is the way that I think about it. And then I muscle test on myself. So I will do the muscle
Oh,
testing on myself, and I just use one of my little fingers to muscle test on and test up what they need. And then when I'm doing the vibrational, if I need to sniff an oil, I will give them the vibrational resonance of the oil. I will sometimes get them to do some tapping in certain places and infuse that vibrational frequency through their body
mhm.
so that they are also receiving. And because it's all vibrational anyway,
I was just thinking, yeah, I love that also
it's
that, like
non-local.
exactly. And this, terrible global tragedy really has kind
Mm,
of opened our
yeah.
eyes to the possibilities of that, right? Like, there were
Oh,
rules against calling it kinesiology because you couldn't lay hands on people. Well, then
yeah.
you really literally could not lay hands on people. It was a terrible
Yeah.
plan, and so
Yeah.
we were forced to not rely on so much of
Yeah.
the gross, and I don't mean, like, disgusting, I mean, like, the
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
large, heavy density
Yes.
stuff, and now we find ways to work with the
Yeah.
finer density energies
Mm,
because yeah, I did similar things, right? Just like
yeah.
working one-on-one with people face to face,
Mm,
and then we all got kind of outside of our comfort zones. That's so interesting. But you're right, it's all energy. If you're doing energetic work,
mm,
you know,
yeah.
energy is not limited by proximity, like a
No.
geographical proximity.
No. And I've got clients in the US, I've got clients up in Canberra, I've got clients, one of my clients moved to Vietnam. And so I still see all of them. Actually, they're back at the moment, so I'm super excited to actually get to see face to face. But again, I've got clients that are coming in from all over the place now because the world is opening up in that
Yeah.
way. And I absolutely love that. And I bring in, a bit of the kinesiology, but also the coaching work I've done, plus all the other stuff that I've done myself. I am the eternal sage. I'm constantly learning and finding new courses
Gosh, I
and new
remember the
things to
day we met, you
do.
were like, "I have made a promise I will take no more new courses this year. I will finish the
Yeah.
57 that I have already
Yeah.
started." Yeah,
I
and,
banned myself.
well,
Yeah.
it's
Banned
just
myself.
it's so fascinating because the more you learn, the more you realize how much there is to learn.
Yeah.
Um,
And
oh,
the less you realize, and the more you realize, I don't know.
yeah.
And especially when you're looking at energy, and it is a relatively new field of study, even though this stuff is ancient, people haven't really studied it the way
In
that
a
they're
long
starting to
time.
now.
Right. I feel like there was
Yeah.
a time in history, ancient history maybe, but there
Yeah.
was a time and there were cultures that did it. And then
Mm,
you and I were not raised in those cultures, so
yeah.
we never heard about it. We're having to
No.
sort of stumble our way through it
Yeah.
as adults. So there
Yeah.
is a lot to learn. But I also
Mm,
was thinking that it's nice to not have to necessarily put hands on people for this technique because some people's trauma does stem from
yeah.
touch and that can be too intense, and so I
Mm,
love that it's available to people who are not necessarily like, when I teach yoga,
yeah.
like, sometimes people just they cannot be touched,
Mm,
and so any sort of, like, energetic direction that I
yeah.
wanna give has to be done with my words or,
Mm,
just, like, waves of like creation of the space or whatever it is, however you want to
Yeah.
think about it. But yeah, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And look, I love working online. I love working in person as well, of course. But there is something very different. It's I don't know if the signal is almost clearer because you're so hyper focused on this screen that some of the other noise gets, tuned out.
Or
But
because
there's
people are
something
in
very
their own
different.
spaces.
Yeah,
Like
there's
I'm
something
in
different.
my room, you're in your room, and so we're not like
Mm, yeah,
cluttered with being in an office space or something. I don't know. It's just this idea.
yeah.
Um, sorry, were you going to say
No,
something? Oh,
no.
and I was going to say, Amanda, you wrote a book.
Hmm.
Will you tell me about the
I
book? Well,
did.
actually, just tell
Yes.
me because I love the title of it.
It's called Divine Messy Human, a spiritual guide to prioritizing internal truth over external influence.
Divine messy human.
Yes.
So only for messy
So,
humans. If you're like a totally clean, healed human, you won't need this book. And I think
but
there's like
I,
one person listening who's like, "Oh, well, I'm good then." Everyone else is like, "Oh, yeah, that's me, messy."
but the reason it's originally I was going to call it messily human, but I really needed to bring in the divine because we are all divine creatures. We all have access to the divine. We all come from that original God source, whatever you want to call it, universal wisdom, the goddess, you give it whatever name you want. It's that same energetic place. And the human experience is messy. We have to deal with other humans and emotions and 3D reality and all of the things. There's the conditioning and the society and the fear and all of that stuff, which does mess up all of that perfection and all of that wonder that we are born with. But if we can accept the divinity and we can love and accept the messiness, it does make our human experience much more rich and fulfilling. When we're denying our divinity and denying that we're messy humans and, papering over those cracks in our facade and trying to keep up appearances, then that human experience is really tough. And I've lived both.
Right. Yeah. This has been an amazing conversation. Like I said, I knew I was going to learn a ton, and you did not disappoint. So
Thank you, my
thank you
love.
for your time. Will you tell us where we can find out more about you, your book, what you do, if you've got resources on kinesiology that you recommend? Tell me more.
Yeah, so the best place to start is my website, which is amandakate.com.au. And most of my social links are there, but you'll find me there's Facebook and Insta, and I think LinkedIn links. The only one I haven't yet put up is my TikTok one, which I keep saying I'm going to do. So at some point it'll be there. I do all of my socials sporadically when I get the, you know.
Same, same. When I feel motivated, when I feel inspired.
Yeah. So they're not 3, 4, 5 posts a day. I do have a newsletter that I send out monthly, sometimes fortnightly, depending on what's going on.
Oh, that's
But I
cool.
do try not to infiltrate people's inboxes too much because I know that I'm the type of person who unfollows. And I
That's right.
know
Yeah.
email marketing is supposed to be the thing, but when I see people with 40,000 unread emails, I go, really, is it?
I find that
Um,
stressful. I don't like to look at people. It's not my inbox, and I look at somebody else's inbox, and I'm like, why I'm having heart palpitations.
oh,
Um,
yeah, I'm the
all
same.
right, so
But
we
I
can
look at
sign
how
up
many
for
I
it, but we
delete. Yeah,
yes, but we wouldn't get
you'll
it.
only get
Cool. And is
you
your book
don't get
available on
much.
your website?
Yes, it's on my website, but the best place for you over there to get it, because it'll be cheaper postage and packing, of course, would be from Amazon Kindle or Barnes and Noble have it, and I think a few other online bookstores do.
Okay, cool. So kind of
Yeah,
like wherever you get your books, you can find
yeah,
it. That's awesome.
yeah.
Thank you again so very, very much for your time. I appreciate you. I appreciate the work that you're doing in the world, and I just wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the work you're bringing into the world. We appreciate you. So yeah,
Awesome.
mutual.
Yay. All right. Have a wonderful day, Amanda, and I will talk to you again
Yeah,
soon.
will
Bye.
do.
Thanks for listening to that. Did you get your mind blown as much as I did? I know that vibrational like attracts like, but this breakdown for me was so precise and made so much sense on a really deep level. It gave me quite a bit to think about how I want to show up in the world. I'm going to put all her links in the show notes, so be sure to check her out. I will also put my own social links there in case you want to follow me as well. And look into her book, Divine Messy Human, because I think that's how we all feel so much of the time, at least the messy part, right? Anyway, I hope you have an incredible week. Let me know how you're doing, what you're thinking, and what you need. I love you all. Bye.